Typhon siege tanks. The hard lore will be given after an introductory tale. From the Bald Library, Bitter Tears. Story continued from Triumvirate of Terror playlist. The time, the scouring, the place, the battle barge merciless marauder. In his personal quarters, Praetor Tarax Antarax stood before the vidscreen's dying light. He had not moved, repositioned, nor shuffled during the entire communication. Not one muscle in his body, not one in his face. He had blinked but the once when the light had sparked into existence. He had glared all throughout it at the poor soul that had imparted the message. He did so quickly, economically. No embellishment nor sugar-coating. They were both praetors, both iron warriors of old Terran stock. They were iron. So they had not bandied words. If it were anyone else, they would most likely feel snubbed, chastened, discarded. Of course, this was the intent. For most of his rank and position, to be forced to impart this information to the men under him would be a calculated humiliation. And it was calculated all right. But Tarax Antarax had been ready for something, because he had already made his plans pretty clear. The ships and marines under his command had skirted the main fleet and moved off slightly. Oh, they had dug in and fought for every inch of space and ground when they believed they could punish the loyalist lackeys. Antarax had made the scouring a living hell for many a loyalist attacking force. Yet, he had not asked for reinforcements, equipment, or even ships from the Primarch. Barely acknowledged vague orders. The warp was turbulent. All knew this. Since the breaking of the Siege of Terror, things had not gone their way as they did when Horus was around. And Perturabo, the Primarch, he fought like a cornered bear, but he never cared one whit for any of his men. All knew they could and would be sacrificed just to bleed the enemy, especially if said enemy were the Seventh, Dawn and his sons. There was no victory to be had from the Lord of Iron. All knew it, yet few acted upon it. The Lion, the Khan, the Wolf, Dawn, Corax, Vulcan, some remains of the Angels and the 10th, all but Gilliman and the Ultramarines hunted the leaderless, desperate, and scattered traitor legions. Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, Magnus, all had disappeared into the warp, leaving their legions to run and hide, alone. The noose was closing. All that remained of the Imperium, now terrible in their retribution against those who had sided with the War Master. So Tarax Antarax had seen the writing on the wall. A lowly sergeant when the Emperor led them into battle. He had no love of his Primarch outside that obliged by his genetics, which, with the will of Antarax, this meant next to none at all. He had manoeuvred his flotilla away to the very edges of accepted range. To any but himself and the Primarch, he would still look the loyal, obedient soldier. But they both knew Antarax was preparing to go rogue. So, this decision, this slight, had been understandable. Tarax Antarax looked at the dead screen and breathed in slowly and deeply. His Terminator-armoured gauntlets squealed slightly as metal rubbed on metal as he clenched and unclenched his fist. A vein in his neck was pulsing, his brows furrowed in their usual way, but knotted so tightly that a bolt round would bounce off them. He nodded to himself, then marched to the command deck. He never shuffled, wandered, ran, nor charged. Antarax marched everywhere, always flanked or trailed by his honor guard. Assassination attempts or challenges were almost unheard of, but that almost was all important. He led his small entourage to the command deck, and there imparted the news to his men, all of them. They had missed the party. More to put it, they had not even been invited. While the majority of the Iron Warriors had been mustered to punish the Imperial Fists at the Iron Cage, they, Tarax Antarax's men, had been overlooked. At the end of his proclamation, a silence descended that was so total that it left all hearing their own heartbeats. All remembered how Tarax Antarax had been as cold as ice when the order was given to retreat from Terra, to quit the siege. And this was his most dangerous state. Where Hexamel or Ullik may have raged or spat, Tarax never showed his ire in word or affectation. He acted. Hence, all present waited to see what or who would bear the fruits of his cold rage. Yet, he did not finish there. He declared that the army was self-contained, and had been so for many years now. He reminded all of them how they had ever been a fraternity unto themselves. When had they ever pleaded for assistance? When had they begged or borrowed equipment, resources, or even manpower? Or even seed? Tarax was correct, and all there knew it. They had Mechanicum ships with them, fully functioning production lines, apothecaries capable of replenishing their manpower. After the Dropsite massacre, they had been rich in gene seed indeed. They had raided and acquired, building, not depleting their forces, over all of the time of the heresy. Their praetor, Tarax Antarax, had been unbelievably firm, but he had most often been fair as well, and few could say that. Never a charismatic man, he had ruled through iron discipline and an inbuilt fear of him, earned over few but very publicized executions and duels. Tarax was solid. He was fury, and he brought victory. Never having to prove himself to any, never wishing to supplicate himself to the Primarch, despite the natural inclination of all Astartes to serve their father without question. Some quietly whispered if Tarax Antarax even considered himself an Iron Warrior any longer, or if he ever had. But none would trade his leadership for that of a praetor close to the eye of Perturabo, for in those outfits, casualties were extreme and rewards were slight, if they came at all. Better for the eye of the Primarch to pass them over. They always got the job done, no matter its genesis, no matter its difficulty. They always won out in the end. So, in a strange way, many of his men were now unshakably loyal. Better the devil you know. Certainly better than the greater devil, the Lord of Iron, Perturabo. So, when Tarax Antarax declared that he had accepted a new mission, none questioned. When he ordered all communications from the Primarch and Greater Legion to be ignored, as they would be geists of the Immaterium, or enemy communications designed to take them off course, none questioned that either. His address over, he turned to the startled deck officers. They were startled by the speech, but not shocked. Anyone with an ounce of brain left in their heads knew this was no order from their overlord. It was the excuse. Tarax was going rogue, and nearly all were on board with the action. As for the greater, so for the lesser. The lesson of Istvan III was not missed by Tarax Antarax. Any who were not wholeheartedly behind this defection were swiftly identified. Those squads that held for the Primarch were soon used up in bloody attacks, and the few strange officers too high up to be expended in conflict were slain in direct actions from the Praetor. Oh, some warlords might have made them disappear, taken in the night without ceremony, or even acknowledgement that they were gone. This was not the way of Tarax Antarax. He did it all publicly, swiftly, and brutally. His men knew where he stood, so he knew where they stood, behind him or against him, and the latter was a death sentence. Addressing the deck crew, Perturabo Antarax then calmly asked, "How many cowardly scum do we have left?" All looked down at their screens or printouts. They knew what he meant immediately. Space Marines they had captured in battle. It was always difficult to take them alive. They cost dearly, but it was a challenge set the inductii. Perturabo Antarax demanded that any inductii had to capture a full Marine to be granted this rank in turn. So many more had been taken than near any other formation in the traitor ranks. Yet the answer was not going to be to his liking, and all knew it. They shiftily darted looks to the Centurion. Paravus, he knew he had to answer, but it might be the last thing he did. But he did it. "None, my lord. Last dozen took their own lives." The Praetor turned and pinned the Centurion with his glare. "Have the idiot in charge of the pens executed." Paravus nodded and gestured to a lieutenant, who then marched from the bridge with breacher unit in tow. The Praetor stated coldly, "Our mission must be sanctified in victory. Find me a target, Paravus. Now!" The Centurion saluted, and his hands then danced across his screen. After a mere minute, he brought his display up onto the main screen, so he could explain. "Here, my lord, the Placidius system. A single world, a single conurbation. But there are issues." The Praetor merely raised an eyebrow at him. "We have 3 Imperial fleets within strike range. If the governor of Placidius is effective, then he will alert the Loyalists as soon as we translate into real space. Then we may have only days before one of the scouring fleets moves to meet us. We could get pinned to the world. The Loyalist scum are in numbers it would be challenging for us to contend with. Impossible to survive for any but you, Lord Cudgel." Antarax sneered. "I have already cleaned my arse today, Paravus. Get your tongue out of it." Paravus nodded, but said nothing. "Defences of the city?" spat Antarax. "Overlapping void shields. They repulsed an attack of the 14th some 5 years ago, when we originally moved through this sector. They were deemed unworthy of further assault. They have little importance in either position or properties, so Mortarion and his legion simply flew straight by them. More's the better. We shall see if Iron Warriors can do what they could not." Paravus spoke calmly but lowly, audible but little above a whisper. "My lord, we will only get a day or 2 at most." Antarax then looked at him and grinned. It was a terrifying sight, one seen perhaps once a decade. Mass with mirth. A rare display indeed from this Marine. "Call down to the armory. Have them prepare my personal squadron." Paravus's eyes narrowed, as he too leered, and then sent the order down to the armory. This was going to be most entertaining. Days later, the denizens of Placidius 6 looked out across the plain to see the Iron Warrior landers touch down. So few. Was this some form of joke? Well, the traitors were about to learn the same lesson taught to the Death Guard. Citadel Primus was not going to be easy pickings. These fools would join their cousins as festering dead before the wars of the city. A mere score of heavy vehicles came at them, kicking up dust, and masking their approach with a barrage from a score of manticores and medusas. Their shots pluming on the shields, distracting those within. Yet still, all inside could tell that these were land raiders approaching. As soon as they were within range of the outer defences, they opened up. Las cannon shots twinkled as the concentrated light slammed through the air and attempted to punch straight through the lead vehicles. Yet only one or two were destroyed. As a line of tanks came on, the defenders became more frantic. Volleys came out faster, but less accurately. There was massed confusion. The very same defensive weapons had slaughtered the land raiders of the 14th, burned through them like paper. How? Why? Nothing seemed to stop the oncoming weapons of war. Then they saw it. As the tanks were now clear as day, so close were they, the defenders watched on dolefully as their firepower was stopped by shimmering shields of energy to the fore of the tanks. These were no normal land raiders. Extended longer, many had huge cannons at their front. The las cannon fire was being absorbed by what could only be flare shields. The oncoming enemy had not even fired back once. But now they closed and slowed. A second rank of Vindicators powered forward to support the Land Raider variants, and as one, they all fired. The shells coming from these Land Raider variants slammed into the Void Shields, tearing them down in the one volley. The Vindicators then opened up and pummeled the walls, stripping them of their own defences. The second volley from the Land Raiders then saw entire segments explode backwards, or smashed to pieces. Other variants of Land Raiders, no lesser in size, but without the cannons on the front, then ploughed into the gaps, and assault ramps lowered, and outpoured hundreds of Iron Warriors directly into the city. The troop carriers were Spartans, of course. The two destroyers were Tarax Antarax's own Typhon squadron. In he marched, taking his personal Terminator guard and Ossus the Unmaker. And over the next day, the citadel was denuded of all life. Tarax then ordered the Typhons into the city walls, and they laid the place low. Not one stone was left on top of another by day's end. When Tarax Antarax finally came back to the merciless marauder, Centurion Paravus was the only one to ask the question that burned in every mind that witnessed his attack. But luckily for Paravus, he did so in private. "I do not question you, my lord. I merely wish to learn. The annihilation of the citadel. Why, my lord? They were only humans. No threat to us, with ammunition so precious. Why?" The Praetor looked at him coldly, seeming to weigh up if he would respond with words or his power maul. But words won out. "No, Paravus. They were not just humans. They were Imperial subjects. I want whoever finds them to know one thing." And Paravus retorted, "What would that be, my lord Antarax?" "That the war isn't over. While I live, it will never be over." Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and war gear of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And hit the like and subscribe buttons if this entry entertains or relaxes you. And so, we take a look at one of the many historic Lords of War deployed during the Great Crusade and the terrible Horus Heresy. And I can assure you, I love this monster, for that is exactly what it is, a monster. A super heavy tank from a different age, a different scale and intensity of war. The brainchild of the Lord of Iron, Perturabo, Primarch of the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors. It terrorized all it was used against, for a very brief time, for nothing and nobody can stand before its wrath. A siege tank par excellence. I give you the Typhon. designated a Lord of War. Now, some may say that Perturabo was a genius, as were all of the Primarchs. But did he really do more than copy and upscale the Vindicator, is what some might say. But size matters in engineering, so it's not always that simple, and few could refute the efficacy of his invention. Now, why bring up the Vindicator? Well, to a very real extent, the Vindicator is a big gun attached to the front of a Rhino chassis, sacrificing the usual troop-carrying capacity of the Rhino for the energy and ammunition for the cannon on its prow. The Demolisher Cannon. A thing of sheer dread in close-range fire. It can tear into dreadnoughts, vehicles, or power-armoured marines with equal lethality, equal devastation. Now the Vindicator is based on the Rhino chassis. So consider now the same type of affair, attached to not just a Land Raider. No! It is attached to the Land Raider Spartan frame, which we all know is possibly my favourite tank at present. Typhon, the Greek mythological demon born of Gaia and Tartarus. Done a video on that one on my other channel. The being that defeated Zeus and near brought hell to earth. This is the namesake of this vehicle, and it is deeply appropriate indeed. For the Typhon is not merely a large Vindicator, it is a terror from the past. The Typhon was designed by Perturabo himself, created to end sieges that could have dragged on for months. Yet with these horrors, even in small numbers, the Lord of Iron could end sieges in hours. A pattern that was lauded by most of his brethren, used by Dawn and Ferrus Manus in particular, but near all legions had these horrors in their arsenals. For the Typhon is armed with the Dread Hammer Cannon, an artillery piece that can fire shells that weigh tons. With only a dozen shells capacity, they did not need more. For each shell would erupt into an explosion that could bring down walls, envelop entire vehicles, smash apart knights, and evaporate entire squads of marines in the one strike. For siege conflict, only the arcane weaponry of the Ordo Reductor comes even close to its overwhelming might. And of course, the Typhon had sponsored weapons, usually being las cannons, and on near any other vehicle they would have been the main weapon. Yet here, they were little more than pea shooters compared to the Dreadhammer Cannon. At 10 meters long and 9 meters wide, this beast was not hard to hit. Yet as a variant of the Spartan pattern Land Raider, they had the energy supply to maintain a flare shield. A force field that would bear the brunt of any attack, most often energy weapons though. Add this to the robust armour of any Land Raider variant, and you have a brick that cannot be stopped, cannot be slowed. Practically impervious to firepower below that of a Knight or Titan, with the ability to lay waste to anything before it. Indeed, it did exactly what it was designed to do. It raced towards the walls of a hive or hard point, then brought them down, easily. Coming from the manufactorums of Anvilus and Mars Forge Worlds, they were made all the way up to the Martian Civil War. Now, they are part of history. They may be seen as elements of a traitor legion formation, which is usually bowel liquefying for any who know of their might. But they are not really made by the Imperium any longer. And this is for very simple and understandable reasons. Firstly, they are incredibly advanced. The skill to forge or even maintain flare shields is lost to most, even amongst the Adeptus Mechanicus. Secondly, because the raw materials required are far better deployed in other vehicles, other endeavours. And thirdly, because they represent a form of war that is simply no longer enacted by the Space Marines. Despite their reputation, the Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, are so few in number that they do not engage in near any form of combat but decapitation and lightning strikes on enemy warlords. It is the Guard that fight siege conflicts. It is the Guard that pack battlefields and stand against the hordes of the Greenskins and Tyranids. The Space Marines are now an elite special force. They simply do not engage in this form of warfare anymore. Yes, There are some first and second founding chapters that may still have one or two of these Goliaths in their armoury, but it is not easy to gain agreement for their use, if a chapter has any at all, for they are ancient relics of the chapter, and they are not gambled with for a victory, unless a sector entire hangs in the balance. Even so, it requires the Tech Marines to support the venture, to wake the ancient machine spirit of the vehicle, and this is not always possible, nor even advisable, for these are machine spirits that have endured the worst possible wars, the most carnage any could have witnessed, and after such long slumber, none can be entirely certain how these machine spirits will act in the heat of battle. Hence, they are a two-edged sword that rarely gain as much as they risk. Now on to the Gushathon, for we all know I love my melters, melty, and the Spartan of course, yet the Typhon is another of my favourites of recent years, up there with the Kratos, as I've been playing Horus Heresy 2nd edition, not 40k. No snobbery, my tastes just run to the more classic format of play, as exemplified in these older styles of systems. And what a thug the Typhon is on the tabletop. But what a gamble to deploy it at all. Because if someone gets a drop on you, goes first, catches you out before you cleared from your own lines, well, the potential explosion of these monsters is double sized to normal, and a lucky shot from the enemy army could lead to more casualties in your own lines than ever you could inflict on the enemy. But if it works, if you have a good throw, or gain rerolls from your Centurion Siegebreaker, then it can tear your opponent more than a few new orifices. I have seen multiple squads evaporated by it, walls torn down, buildings flattened. And it is perfect for bigger games, either before or behind defences, where the men and metal are packed in deep, when there is nowhere to run to, nowhere to cower. Then this beast, this Lord of War, does exactly what its name implies. It is a demon from another time, a weapon that can cull the enemy en masse, and, as an added bonus to those of us with more thumbs than fingers, it is actually a joy to put together. And I bet you didn't think I'd say that. I will be involved in a 20,000 point game of Horus Heresy 2nd edition on Monday, and I can assure you, I will be fielding my Typhon with great expectations, and we shall see if it makes my opponent's men melt in their masses, or if it turns on its master and becomes a mushroom cloud amidst my own lines. I honestly cannot wait. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed my offering for your entertainment. And most importantly of all, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.